Hello, and thank you for joining me on today's show. I have a very special conversation with one of our all-time favorite guests, David Cay Johnston, the one and only, taped in front of a live audience of stand-up listeners, subscribers, and friends from this past Saturday night at Slate Hill Edible Forest, and a gorgeous evening, gorgeous Saturday in central New York here at the end of the summer. That's right, today's conversation taped at our first ever Farm Jam event this past weekend. We had an amazing time this weekend. I, along with so many others, still so very high from it. Kevin Richburg and I are so grateful to all of you who joined us. Thank you to everybody who came and contributed. We'll have a lot more to say about it, and we'll talk about it and have lots of laughs with lots of folks that were there this Thursday at the Thursday night 8 p.m. happy hour hangout. But for today's show, I don't have the news segment. I should be getting back to the regular format on tomorrow's show. But I'm going to get right to my conversation with David from Saturday night. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, a best-selling author, a business and law professor now at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I was so excited, we were so excited that he and his lovely wife Jennifer came and joined us. I just can't say enough about how generous he was and how he handled everybody in person. He was like a statesman, like a diplomat. He was walking around and so friendly, putting everybody in his light, saying hello to almost everybody and anybody who wanted to talk to him. He took pictures. It was a great night, and I think a really great conversation. I'm so glad that we didn't get rained on and that it all recorded okay. And thanks again to everybody who helped and who was there, and I'm so excited to talk more about it. But right now, I want to share with you my conversation. Very heartfelt, very thoughtful, serious, at times obviously moments of levity. The great David Cay Johnston right now.
So I am very excited that the gentleman who is joined me so many times in the past, and that he is here tonight because the last time I had the pleasure of interviewing him live, he mentioned, of course, that he's in Rochester, where he now is at the Rochester Institute of Technology. They said, well, invite him to Farm Jam. And I said, I'm not going to invite David Cay Johnston to Farm Jam. And someone said, why not? I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad that you and your lovely bride, Janet, joined us. And I thank you very much for being here. David Cay Johnston, everybody. And I'll give you a proper intro. But, yes, what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
Well, the audience ought to know that we're sitting here in this farm. There are animals around. There are a lot of bee hives nearby. And there are people who came here from Anchorage, Alaska, Ventura, California, Stone Mountain, Georgia, Winchester, Virginia, I mean, all over just for this, Las Vegas, just to come see you, not me, to see you, which is, I think, an astonishing set of praise for, how you've turned comedy into serious business on public policy.
That's very, very kind of you, and I will only say about that, and as I was telling your wife, the issues that you know as much about as anybody in this country are hard to get people engaged on. My whole goal has been to fight apathy my whole career, which is why The Daily Show and the Colbert Report taught me that people can learn and care about things if they're delivered in an effective way. But the way that you actually communicate doesn't require an interlocutor. You're so good at communicating all of these issues because you're so smart and articulate at it. So I am so excited to have you here and to throw these questions. And I hope to argue vehemently with you about economic policy and trade policy, but specifically tax policy and some of the theories around modern monetary theory.
I should thank you for something.
I don't know what any of those words mean, by the way. I should mention also the words I just said.
First time I was on with you on Sirius XM, where you had asked me if I'd come over, so I walked over. I thought I was still at the New York Times when it happened, but I may have been in New York for some other reason. And you and I got to speak a little bit. And I said, well, the nice thing about watching The Daily Show and Colbert Report is clearly young people are following the news and they understand it. And you looked at me like I was a complete blithering idiot and said something along the lines of, you're not listening carefully. They are explaining what the news is that the young people haven't read, so they'll see the laughter in it.
That sounds smart. I said that?
You said that.
I'm impressed with
I have told that story 100 times in the years since.
Well, that's the whole theory. And I'll only say this. When you said they're coming here for me, I want to make it very clear. What I'm trying to do and what I'd like to get, and maybe I'll have this be my first question to you, is the paradigm that we're in now, the state that we're in now, the country that we're in now, we didn't really expect.
We're in New York, in case you're not clear.
But we're still in America. And still in America. And a lot of these people live in states where they don't have now as many rights. To me, the most important thing that we can all do right now, we're not going to change this overnight, maybe not for a long time. The most important thing we can do is build community and help folks out that need help, especially marginalized folks. And to me, that's the job right now, is do whatever you can for the least amongst us as well as your close friend. Make new friends, network, and we've learned this from plenty of human civilizations in the past, but my thing is building community within whatever you want to call this, authoritarianism, fascism, late stage, whatever. So
whatever those things mean.
What any of those mean. This is our community, a very small part of it, but and that's what we're trying to do, and I think that's important. Do you think that's important, community?
Not only do I think it's important, but, we have been digging ourselves into this since about 1975, certainly since 1981 when Ronald Reagan was elected, and people said, gee, all that prosperity from the New Deal, let's reject that in favor of more money for the wealthiest among us and long-term degradation of our economic standards. Of course, they didn't know that's what they were doing. It was just what they did. And because it took us at least 45 years to get into this, it's going to take a while to get out of this, assuming we get out of it, which is not certain. And I would suggest that there are some words, and I'll try and think of some others in the next 45 minutes, that we should keep in mind. But one of them is regard. A hallmark of the Trumpers is they have no regard for other people. They don't care about other people. And by other people, I mean anybody who isn't just like who they imagine themselves to be. Well said, yeah. And so regard is a very important word we need to put back as much as we can. I teach my RIT students in the journalism classes I teach. I also teach criminal justice and soon political science and law, that if you don't have regard for people you can't stand, you're really not standing up for any of the Bill of Rights. You have to defend the rights of people who you just cannot stand, because if they don't have rights, you don't have rights. As Donald said the other day, a lot of millions of people are saying it'd be good to have a dictatorship, or essentially words to that effect. I don't know. Have you heard anybody in the audience here among people people who are Trumpers? Yes, we need a dictatorship.
Well, I think they do want it, but they don't call it that. They want daddy.
They want daddy.
They want as many. There are certain people amongst us. I can look out and see some of them, the whites, and they want as many cops on the streets because they feel safer. They like the military on their streets. They like that. They want it, and they're fine with it. And that's what he means when he says some of these people would love. I'm doing stuff without any checks and balances, separation of powers. Screw it. Executive order is equal to the law. Cops in Chicago, they like it, they want it, and that's how other countries have done it. And now I'm daddy.
Yeah, boy,
that felt amazing. By
that's
the way,
like the worst possible daddy you could get would be the only worse daddy than Donald Trump would be Donald Trump's real father.
Wow, that's our clip. Junior is a pretty bad dad too. Yeah, it's a good point. So let me change.
What?
Oh, wow. Let's just get this out of the way. This is a unique thing. Like I found you through your books. Perfectly Legal and Free Lunch changed my mind, changed my life. I was in the audience, the way that those books, specifically the fine print as well, which came third, I think, in that series, the way they resonated, that's my whole thing, is how do people like what we're talking about? They love David Cay Johnston, and they love those two books, especially particularly. And I learned so much about America and tax policy and economic policy and wealth issues, and that's where I found you. But I didn't know that you were such good friends with Donald Trump. So tell us, you've written books about him as well, but you also know the man, in case people don't know this, and you tell us about your relationship with the current president of the United States. And what does he smell like? I would imagine.
Well, fortunately, I haven't been around him lately, so I don't know, but there is a meme on the internet you can find of when he met with the European leaders and Zelensky, and you'll notice many of them clearly
Noxious.
Yes, clearly something smells very bad, and it's troubling them, and you can't miss it if you
I've heard
zero in on them.
Got some struggles, but your relationship with him is professional.
Yes. In 1988, I left the LA Times after 12 years, and I went to Atlantic City for the Philadelphia Inquirer to write about the gambling industry, which I believed casinos were about to spread across the country because of a 1987 Supreme Court decision that indigenous peoples, in many cases, not all of them, were entitled to have a casino. And that's what happened. And I met Donald Trump 2 or 3 days in, and then understanding he was the only interesting casino person in town because the owners, the rest of them, were corporations, and they hired boring suits to run the places. And immediately I was told by Donald's own executives, who decided right away they could trust me, that he was a complete fraud and utter incompetent. He was always interfering in the business. He was lowering profits and then yelling at them. And he was extracting cash as fast as he could out of the enterprises. Of course, if you're a smart businessman, you're trying to create wealth, you reinvest in the business, you upgrade things. When your hotel is 5 years old, you replace the mattresses, and instead of paint, you put wallpaper on the walls.
Right.
And he didn't do any of that. In fact, I stayed in Trump Plaza Casino for one night, not long before it was blown up and torn down. And it had the built-in furniture, all had wood putty patches with paint that didn't match. The sofa was lumpy and uncomfortable to sleep on. It was almost a flea bag because of the way that he ran his business. So anyway.
Covered in gold, though.
No, actually not.
Oh.
Covered in
mold.
Covered in a color, a version of yellow that I generally refer to as vulture vomit.
Oh.
Volvo used to have that color.
Or a Trump urine, but take your choice.
And anyway, when I spoke to Donald's guys and then to the regulators, they all kept telling me he didn't know what he was doing. And I kept saying, the man owns 2 casinos. How can he not know what he's doing? And with the connivance of his guys, I wrote 4 questions about the gambling business, all of which were premised on a falsehood. And I sit down with Donald for a long interview in June of 1988. And when I bring up these falsities, he just runs with them. He just assumes they're true. And as I'm listening to him, I go to myself, because we just moved from California, right? California was flooded with these TV ads. Is your husband going to leave you? Is your boyfriend having an affair with your sister? Call California Psychics. We're the real deal, and we can tell you. And I thought, this guy should be on California Psychics. He's really into, telling you what he thinks you want to hear.
And now he's president.
And now, because he's been very good at telling people what they think they want to hear. And, there's seething anger in this country, as there should be, over what we've done to people. And let me give you a couple of numbers. I know that turns people off, but a couple of numbers that sort of illustrate that. In 2016, the year Donald first won not the popular vote, but the Electoral College, the bottom 90% of Americans made as much money as people made in 1973, adjusted for inflation, through the end of November, through Thanksgiving. They basically went the last month of the year with no money. Now, add on the fact that if you had a pension in 1973, and about 45% of workers did, and you had health care, which was more than half of workers back then, that used to be on top of your salary. It was called a fringe benefit. Now it mostly comes out of your paycheck. So take that into account, and people only got paid until Halloween. So compared to 1973, in 2016, people were only getting paid for the first 10 months of the year. No wonder they were angry and going, what's going on? And that's what my series of books you mentioned on the economy, Perfectly Legal on Taxes, Free Lunch on Subsidies to Big Corporations and Some Select Individuals, and the fine print about suppressing competition were all about. And so Americans are legitimately angry, but they're looking at the wrong place. They think that unions are the problem. They think that Democrats are the problem. I've tried to explain to many Trumpers that the last 2 presidents who produced budget surpluses were Bill Clinton for 4 years, and if you adjust for Social Security, all 8 years, and Mr. Guns and Butter himself, Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Right.
Not true. No, that can't be true. They just complete rejection of the facts. And we live in a society now where everybody thinks, oh, I have the internet. I know more than my doctor does.
We do our own research here as a community.
Right.
I would like to announce no one here is vaxxed. Did I tell you that? I kid. It's what I'm hearing you say is what I think you've helped identify throughout your career is like there are serious problems, injustices with the way our economic system works. It is rigged against you by these people. And there are real problems, but also what they've done a great job at, what Trump and Republicans, frankly, have done is they've identified the wrong roots and the wrong causes. Right. For example, immigrants and poor folks and so on. So there is a problem, but they've convinced so many people through right-wing media especially that the problem, for example, with the financial crisis was that poor folks were buying homes they couldn't afford as opposed to deregulation to dispense larger.
No, stop you, Pete.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
There is no such thing as deregulation.
I said
there
a
is
word I
only
shouldn't have said.
Re-regulation, which overwhelmingly means on behalf of the big companies against the consumer.
Oh, that's good.
Re-regulation.
That's good stuff.
Anybody says deregulation, nonsense.
Oh, I like that.
But I want to give you another number that goes to this, all right?
Good.
After my trilogy came out, not because of it, just factually after it, the RAND Corporation, the think tank in California started by the Air Force and Boeing, did a study of what was going on in the American economy. From 1974, the year after I mentioned, 73.
The year before I was born.
God, I have children. Almost all my children are older than you.
About to be 50,
motherfucker. And 2018. What happened and what Rand found is that had we kept the income distribution of 1973, in 2018, the bottom 90% of Americans' incomes would have been 2/3 larger. Now, you want to make a whole bunch of social pathologies go away, people tweaking on meth, which you find any little town you drive across the Midwest, people who are alcoholics because they can't cope with the life around them, people who are angry and short-tempered and, beat their kids and things like that.
All kinds of struggles.
Add 67% to their income, and a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of it goes away.
Well said.
And the total amount of money Rand calculated that was redistributed to the top 10, although they focused on the top 10%. The real gains are in the top 10th of 1%, 1 in 1,000 households. $50 trillion over close to 50 years. $50 trillion over close to 50 years. That's the core issue here. And the Republicans, at least certainly since Reagan, I could make a pretty good case all the way back to the end of World War II, have had a consistent economic view of America. The reason there aren't more jobs, the reason there isn't more prosperity, is that the rich don't have enough. They're not investing as much as they could. They're not doing those things that create jobs. And so we need to get them more money. And there are two ways to do this. One of them is you reduce the taxes on the people at the top. But the other way is you take away from children, the disabled, the elderly, and the sick. And why them? They can't fight back. That's why. They rely on proxies like us to fight back. And so then, pursuant to the memo by Lewis Powell, before he became a Supreme Court justice, known as the Powell memo, which if you haven't heard of it, just go on the internet, type Powell memo in, and read it. Brilliant, brilliant document. Evil document, but brilliant. He said if we're going to have business be in charge in America, we have to get rid of the unions. We've got to get rid of the social justice movements, which were largely run by churches and other religious institutions. And we have to turn people, into worker bees who will be compliant. We got to shut down serious journalism. It's all laid out in this memo. And if you look at our history since he wrote that memo in the 1960s, in reaction, by the way, to the fact that the most popular man in America was Ralph Nader.
Consumer advocate.
Yes.
That's why he was popular. Advocating for humans, putting profit.
And the only reason I'm here today with my wife, Jennifer Leonard, is Ralph Nader. I went to speak at Ithaca College, which is, 40 miles from here, 2014, and we got in my brand new Volkswagen to drive back on a beautiful Sunday morning, bright, clear sky in western New York, which is so surprisingly wonderful place to live. I would never have imagined until we moved here. And suddenly both of us see this huge black thing. It's like a barbell with heavy weight at each end coming right at the windshield. And both of us, when we spoke of it later, Jennifer's nodding her head, had the exact same reaction. I gripped the wheel as tightly as I could and put my foot on the brake, figuring want to slow the car down, probably why it hit the windshield instead of going over the car. And we both thought, that's it. We were certain we were dead. And instead, we just had a totally shattered windshield. Had we been driving in a car that had the quote-unquote safety glass before Ralph Nader came along and said, hey, this safety glass is routinely slashing people's throats, cutting their jugular vein, in a few cases virtually taking their heads off, we would have been dead. And I wrote a column at the time about, we owe our lives to Ralph Nader. So, yeah, he was enormously popular. And all sorts of things that we have today, like what are the contents of the cereal you're eating that has Robert F. Kennedy all worked up because he doesn't know what riboflavin is? Oh, they have this thing called riboflavin. See it? It's like, and these other ones I can't pronounce, Riboflavin, by the way, is vitamin B2. And so there's been this didn't happen out of nowhere. Well, thank goodness I've done something useful today, Pete.
I've been stocking up on riboflavin supplements for... Well, hold on.
But this happened over through a dedicated effort over a long period of time. And the labor unions did not understand what to do, and they didn't fight back, and they didn't understand economics. Trust me, I've spent a lot of time with labor leaders, and it's very clear they did not go to business school. And so getting out of this requires some big changes. Respect for other people, regard, revival of unions. And as Pope Francis said in 2014, without unions, there is no economic justice.
Well said, and I fully agree. And I want to just bring you back because you said Ralph Nader, and that came out of the Powell memo, and just underscoring, if people don't know about that, I should have done hours on it, and it's a very important point. I want to talk to you about I could talk to you about economics and finance and the history of political economy for 3 hours, and that's maybe the thing
I thought we were going to talk till the sun rose.
We've got hopefully we'll be talking by the time the man who owns the farm comes home. He's not here yet, but we can just talk about that. We can also talk about, and I want to talk to you about journalism and the state of media today, because you know that as well as anybody. You're an expert on that. There's one question I haven't asked you pointedly, and one thing I wanted to get you to talk about in front of this diverse group of people is throughout all of your work, and certainly through all the interviews I've always done, you've always had a great and deep understanding for the history of oppression, specifically when it comes to race and gender in this country. You've always been very inclusive the way you talked in a way that really taught me how, when talking about economics, when talking about finance, making sure to include black and brown folks, the history of America, and certainly women and gender in general. And my question to you is, who radicalized you, old timer?
That's
because you always include this, and I think it's so important. It probably was important at your time, your tenure at the New York Times. But
I literally mean what I'm going to say very, very clearly. Nobody has ever asked that question before, which has always surprised me. So I'm glad that you asked it. I grew up in a very unusual household. My mother was a disowned heiress. My maternal grandfather had one child, my mother, and in today's money, when he died in the mid-50s, and I was a kindergartner or first grader, he was worth $250 million. He was fabulously rich. And so my mother grew up with servants and lots of money, and on her 16th birthday, as she graduated from high school, she got as a gift a Cadillac. And
I got a Plymouth Reliant K car, $900.
And my mother complained all the time when I was growing up that women are chattel property if they're married. They can't do anything without their husband's permission and approval. You can't open a bank account.
It was true, though.
Yeah, and there were no credit cards back then, but you couldn't do anything without your husband. And it was, why are we chattel property? And my father, who was a 100% disabled veteran of World War II and was a chef, what passed in the day for a celebrity chef, even though he was disabled, he worked until he couldn't, and then he died when I was 20 years old. And my father had grown up in New Orleans. And when he was 13 years old, he was suddenly told he could no longer play with black children. Standard practice. And he was livid about this. And just before he turned 19 years old in 1929, a couple of months before the Great Depression began, he went out west and stayed because he said, I can't do anything about the racism. When I was about fourth grade, if my father was home at dinner time, which was not the norm, he would get my younger brother and I, stand us in front of the TV when the John Cameron Swayze Camel Caravan of News sold by the cigarette company would come on. And when they got to whatever the civil rights story was, and he would say, stand in front of the TV, and he put his hands on the back of our necks, and we would see Bull Connors turning dogs and water fountains on people and things like that. And he would turn the TV off, and he'd look at us and he'd say, this cannot continue. You will not allow this. There, but for the grace of God, go you. You could have been born poor and black in the South, and you need to see the world as if you'd been born poor and black in the South, because this is wrong. And when I was 14, he sent me to New Orleans to be with my relatives for the summer with specific instructions that I was to
14 years, that's when it happened.
I was to be in their faces about their racism. And sure enough, I arrived, and the first thing my well-to-do uncle had to take his Mercedes down to be worked on, and we drove to the dealership. And New Orleans is a poor city, understand. And I made a beeline for the water fountain that said colored. And immediately this set off alarms with the family. And eventually they told me that I was touched in the head. But they were completely blind to what racism? What? There's no racism. What are you talking about? As we would sit inside their summer cabin on Lake Pontchartrain having lunch, and the man who worked for us and was doing yard work had to sit outside with the wasps and eat lunch. And I said, well, why don't we bring, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but why don't we bring him into the house? And so all of this had a very profound effect on my seeing things. And my parents were very open-minded. When I was 8 years old, I knew what a Boston marriage is. How many people in this audience of about 50 people know what a Boston marriage is? A couple. It was a euphemism for lesbians living together. And I knew this when I was 8 years old. I knew gay men because my parents were just very open to other people, and they had regard for other people. And we've got to get regard into our philosophy. And anybody who tells you they're a Christian and doesn't have regard, well, they're something, but they're not a Christian. And you know, Pete, that there are literally ministers who have publicly said that their parishioners have come to them and said, why are you teaching this turn the other cheek Sermon on the Mount nonsense from Jesus? We want Donald Trump. Hit him in the face. You want to believe that? You can believe that. I'll defend your right to believe it, but you're not a Christian. And I'm not either.
I was offended by that last part. Before you go on to talk about the hypocrisy, I just want to take a moment to give your parents their flowers. I'm so glad I asked you. That is a round of applause for that story. I'm so glad. I'd never heard you tell that. I never knew you spent your summer of 14 in New Orleans, which is fascinating.
The summer of the march, Martin Luther King March that Philip Randolph organized, along with, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of, Bayard Rustin. They organized the big march, and one New Orleans TV station ran it. And I was sitting in my uncle and aunt's home watching this on TV and calling out to the maid, Miss whoever was I called her, who always had to call me Master David. And I said, hey, come look at this. Oh, hey, look at this. A. Philip Randolph's going to get to talk. And about 11:50, she walks in front of me between me and the TV, and she says, Master David, you have to turn that off now. I said, what are you talking about? It's just getting really going. She says, your Uncle Charlie and his business friends are coming into here in the dining room. They had a formal dining room. And they're having lunch, and I will be in terrible trouble if that is on the television set. And I went, oh, my God. And I got up and I turned it off, and I thought, how unbelievably horrible, because she would have been in big trouble for letting me watch that.
Quick pause. Food is out, I believe, yes. And I want you to go.
Thanks for watching. See you.
I want you as quiet as you can, go serve yourself. And go ahead. Go up there and get your food if you want. If you can wait, then wait. But I'm going to do part 3. Which is about media and your views on what you've seen. And then I'm going to do Q&A, and then we're going to wrap it. So if you have a question,
So the sun isn't going to rise.
I want to. I'll take you as long as you can, but I want to make sure everybody eats and everybody's comfortable and so on. And just take a quick pause, a round of applause for Kitty and Keith and Mike, of course, for helping out. Thank you for doing all the food. You're so generous and kind, and they are just an amazing part of our listening community, and that's what this is. And then also the celebrities have arrived. That is my mom and my dad, Mr. David Cay Johnston. My mom and my dad are here. My dad loves the attention. Don't let him kid you.
What about the steers and the pigs and the chickens? Are we going to applaud for them?
They're on their way. So finally, I want to ask you, I think it's super important as we're talking about all the things that you know a lot about. You know as much as anything about media and the coverage of all the issues that we are talking about. Just a little bit about, because you've done it all, every kind of media, print, television, radio, and you've won all the awards and you've got all the respect and you're at the New York Times for 17 years and so on. But what we are seeing now, this media atmosphere now, I'll start the conversation by saying anything you want to believe, keep it quiet, folks, anything you want to believe, you can believe. In this America, in this version of America, you can believe whatever you want to believe. Vaccines don't work. The moon is made of cheese. Anything you want.
Green cheese.
You can find it. You, however, have taught us to live on Earth One my entire career, come back to data and journalism and how it's done and how it becomes reliable and how it gains credibility. You've got all the credibility and respect a journalist can have. Tell us a little bit about how far you've come. Go eat, everybody. Get your food.
Yeah, get your food, as a few people are starting to do.
Yep.
Understand what journalism is and isn't. Journalism is an accurate recounting of the official version of events, and in America, unlike a totalitarian state like Russia, the official criticisms of the official version of events. I'm in the unofficial business. So when you see a newscast or hear on the radio or pick up in the newspaper, the president said X, Boeing announced the following, the mayor produced his budget. You're going to read an accurate account of what those facts are. And you will read, when the mayor announces his budget, people who don't like the mayor and the city council, they'll be gone and ask, what do you think of the mayor's budget? What's wrong with it? And you'll get a good, reasonable accounting of that. But we have a couple of new and troubling developments. Ever since we allowed Rupert Murdoch to become a citizen, we have had news organizations, notably Fox, notice I only call it Fox, one word, that are in the business of lying to you. And anybody who doubts that, Fox just paid $787.5 million for knowingly, intentionally lying to their audience about one of the software voting system companies. And they have another lawsuit that they haven't been able to settle where they want $2 billion for the same thing. And Fox often pretzels facts. There's technically what they said is what's in the news, but they have turned around to make black, white, up, down, red, blue. And that's been a terrible challenge in this country because they have figured out at Fox and One News America and Breitbart, these other places, how to appeal to your biases and how to do so in a way that resonates with people. If you're thinking, I'm not going to read the New York Times anymore because I didn't like this or that story, that's a huge mistake and a huge benefit to Donald Trump and the people like him who want to end our democracy. News is not about telling you what you want to hear. It is not about comforting you. It is about telling you what, in our judgment as journalists, you need to know. It is exclusion. We have limited resources. Even if you have the New York Times or LA Times staffs when I worked there of 1,200 journalists, you still can't do everything. There's not enough space to do everything. There's enough time. This is important. We're going to tell you about this. That isn't important. We're going to not tell you about that. And journalists are unique in another area that's very important. There's an old saying, I once spent money having somebody research, where's the first time you could find what I'm about to say in print? And it came back to be me, and I am sure I was not the first person to say it. I was floored. But the saying is, doctors bury their mistakes. Lawyers see theirs off to prison. Only journalists sign theirs on the front page for everyone to read. And we publish journalism reviews. There used to be a lot of them around the country. Now we have basically the Columbia Journalism Review at Columbia University. And these are internal critiques where, I've written many pieces for journalism reviews exposing reporting that was fraudulent, reporting that editors failed to properly check before they put it in. And no other occupation does that. It is a unique self-policing matter. And oftentimes competitive newspapers in particular, what we hardly have anymore, will go after each other's work. When I'm the only journalist in America who has caused a broadcaster to be forced to shut down and go out of business over what today we would call fake news. I called it blackouts and news manipulations. And I'm writing these stories in the Detroit Free Press, and lo and behold, the Detroit News writes stories basically saying, don't believe that. Or it's known as the Lansing State Journal. Don't believe that stuff. And so, I have a long history of being a press critic, and there are plenty of journalists who don't like me because of that. That's okay. They're entitled. But journalism now doesn't have nearly the resources we had. At the LA Times, when I turned in my very first expense account in 1976, I was chided for flying coach and for renting a Pinto. Well, after that, trust me, I flew first class and rented Oldsmobiles all the time. And there were years when my expense account was multiples of my salary at the paper because we had money running out our ears and we could pursue stories in great depth. I wrote a long feature once about the thrift store business and how, because Fortune magazine had described one of the biggest charities in the country as being the most efficient charity in the country because they didn't understand it was arguably the least efficient charity in the country because they didn't know the economics of it. And when I finished the piece and turned it in, an editor said, but I want this fact you'd mentioned a long time ago. And I said, I don't think it's worth it. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, to do that, it's going to take, 2 weeks of work. I got to fly back to the East Coast. It's going to be $10,000 of expenses. And he goes, yeah. Try to get $10,000 of expenses today for a whole story. Try
to get a job as a journalist and be able to pay your rent.
Oh, absolutely.
Today.
And I tell young people who want to go into journalism, what you need to do is marry someone who will support your hobby.
That's sad, but funny.
In 1967, I was recruited by the San Jose Mercury by somebody who didn't know when they started recruiting me that I was 18 and had just graduated from Knight High School. I got hired the next year at 19, appalling some of the staff, at least in the first. And my salary in today's money was $67,000.
Your first year.
A teenager. And with overtime, I was making about $84,000, $7,000 a month. I talk to young journalists all the time who tell me they've gotten their first job offer and it's $32,000 in today's money. And this isn't just journalists. Airline pilots who were senior captains of jumbo jets in the mid to late 70s were making well over $1 million a year in today's money. Now they make less than $500,000. The whole country has seen wages come down. We keep minting billionaires and centimillionaires, and many people just have more money than they know what to do with. And this is government policy that's bringing these things about. So journalism isn't left out of that. Journalism is a part of that. And in Washington, the problem is Washington journalism, and I've never worked in Washington, is embarrassed Washington reporters a lot over the years, but not living there. A lot of the work there depends on access. And, you could do a lot of work by reading the Federal Register and paying attention to the paperwork that comes out of the White House, which Charlie Savage of the New York Times won his Pulitzer for doing. But it depends on, I got this line from the senator. The cabinet secretary pulled me aside and whispered something in my ear. Right. And that just does not lead to the kind of skeptical, from a distance reporting. And a lot of it, I read stories all the time in the Wall Street Journal about finance. And I go, this is a very well-written story. It makes perfect sense to me. And the writer of this story doesn't have a clue to what's actually going on because they don't have any deep knowledge. And as the salaries go down, the quality of people over the long haul is going to go down, except for those who either have trust funds. And there are a lot of journalists these days with trust funds, so they don't have the kind of experience I had growing up of, going to work at 10 and full-time at 13. And, literally, I once had an editor at the New York Times this was in 1996, so the numbers would have changed. But I said, think about these poor families in New York who are raising their kids on $500 a week, $26,000 a year. Nobody in New York lives on $26,000 a year. I said, get on the subway with me. I'll take you out to Queens on my way to get on the airplane to fly back to Rochester. Oh, well, nobody cares about those people. And you can find that at every major news organization now because you're getting people who grew up, with a silver spoon in their mouth. Yep. I mean, the current editor of the New York Times, Joe Kahn, who's an excellent journalist. I used to sit a couple of desks away from him when he was a reporter. He's a gazillionaire.
Not
He's
to mention
incredibly rich.
The rest of them.
And it affects how you see the world. It affects how you see the world because reasonably, if you're Diana Henriquez and your grandfather was a coal miner and your father worked for the coal mine company, just wouldn't go into the mines underground, you have a different view of the world than if, you grew up in a house with servants and a private jet.
Your institutional knowledge and life experience brought to the table all this credibility for your career as a journalist, and we are all better for it because you have been covering it in the way that you described your entire career. And I'm going to go to Q&A now. If anybody has any questions.
Just one. Yeah. Don't stop paying attention to the news. If you're ticked off about something, be ticked off about it. We're not here to comfort you. We're here to tell you what we think is important. That's the one bias we're allowed. This is important. That isn't. You're not going to like things. And in the words of my friend Seymour Hersh, one of the greatest investigative reporters ever, you pick up the front page of the New York Times, you can read the greatest journalism human beings have ever produced. Move over one column, pure crap.
By the way, some of the people that are here have said, I love your show, I love what you're doing, but I can't listen that much anymore because I can't take the news. You would tell them they should be listening to the show, right, David?
1 million people died for this country. Don't tell me you can't stomach the news.
Oh, wow, that's profoundly impactful. All right, so Q&A, if anybody has any questions, otherwise we're going to just go eat, and maybe we can come back to it. But does anybody want to ask a question desperately? Could you please come up and say on the microphone so that because I'm recording it, it will catch it. Ladies and gentlemen, it has just been her birthday. Give it up for Vicky.
Hi, and I'm also your tour guide on Farm Jam. My question is, I've run into articles that were clearly written by AI because most of the facts in them have been grossly incorrect. How do you see AI affecting journalism in the future?
Oh, what a question.
Yeah,
you should. What do we have for her for that?
So,
look at that.
So Vicky with 2 Ks in your name. That's a very good question. You're going to see this. We have a problem with students not writing their papers, having them done by AI. First of all, AI at this stage isn't anywhere near the problem will be in the future. We're in the Model T stage, not the Tesla semi-self-driving car stage of AI. And garbage in, garbage out. And, of course, as the computer scientists say, that AI often hallucinates because it comes up with absolutely crazy nonsense things. You can spot AI if you read carefully. There's some indications of it. One of them is boring sentences that are sort of flat and consistent length. No craftsmanship at all. None. Excessive use of M dashes, not N dashes, but M dashes. Those things will probably slowly disappear. But a well-written news story should have multiple sources. If it's online, it should have hypertext links so you can go look at the document. So dcreport.org, the news organization I co-founded and ran for 7 years. I still write for it now and then, but I don't run it anymore. We would try to put as many hypertext links as we could, and we would try to go to here's the government document from the Federal Register. Here's advice on if you want to file comments, how you do it. Here's the link to the video of the person's speech. And you should look for that because the core journalism is attribution and verification. And keep in mind that the people who things are attributed to sometimes get them wrong, and I'll give you a very light version of that. I once had to write a little 200-word piece for the LA Times. We had a whole page of just short items from all around the world. And it said that a California Highway Patrol officer delivered a baby in the backseat of a car on the 10 freeway. And so-and-so, the mother, age 29, right, comma, 29, comma. And the husband called livid. I'm not married to some old hag. My wife is 26 years old. And I said, well, sir, your complaint is with the California Highway Patrol because I wrote this from their announcement. They said she's 29 years old. So you remember that, there's a reason we call it the first draft of history. You need to pay attention to the stories as they develop over time. And this standard of everything perfect isn't in this story today ignores the reality of it's a daily publication. If it's a newspaper, I have written the lead front page story in the New York Times, the LA Times, Philadelphia Inquirer a number of times, probably dozens, where from the time I found out what we had to do to when I had to turn in my copy was an hour. You can't learn everything in that. Tomorrow we'll tell you more. We're doing the best we can. But for AI, boring sentences, things that don't make sense, lack of attribution. I've never seen an AI with hypertext links, but they'll come.
Great question. Great answer. And yes, scary. Any other questions? Nick DiFabrizio, would you mind coming up here to ask your question to David Cay Johnston? Nick is a very smart, talented lawyer. He's very generous, thoughtful. I didn't say anything, but now I'm giving everybody intros.
Yeah, hi, David. I remember now your byline with the Philadelphia Inquirer because during that same time period, I was representing the CRDA in Atlantic City, and we got into very, very serious litigation with Trump over the tunnel project. Eventually ran him out of Atlantic City. But I want to jog your memory and see if you remember, if you can tell me whether this was a true story, because I heard that when Merv Griffin sold him the Taj, Merv was so happy with the price he got because Trump overpaid so much that he sang and danced at the closing table. That was the story that we heard. And then, of course,
I've heard the same story. I do not know that it's true, but I've certainly heard the same story because I've only heard it from secondary sources.
All right. The reason that's important, though, is that that's another example. In the first 6 months or 8 months, they were going gangbusters, and by the 18th month, they were bankrupt. And that's kind of the model that follows him everywhere, which seems to be following in our economy today.
Well, let me be clear about Donald Trump is not a businessman, okay? He's a cash extractor. All of his business deals, with one exception, are the same as a mafia bust-out. You get some guy who's a degenerate gambler. The mobsters take over. They order all sorts of supplies and stuff to be delivered. They then steal it and let the business collapse. And that's the business Donald was basically in a more sophisticated kind of way. And the regulators in New Jersey who claimed that, quote, Atlantic City casinos are the most highly regulated industry in the history of the world, more highly regulated than nuclear power plants. God save us if that's true of nuclear power plants, which I think are sometimes a very good idea. They had 12-year-old children gambling in Donald's casinos. They had all sorts of corruption and crime going on. And you know what? I don't see any 12-year-old children, even though they're right in front of them.
Let me follow up on that. That's a really good point. Before I was a lawyer, I was a Teamster. And you don't mess with the Teamsters, right? And
having been roughed up by them, no, you don't.
A lot of people could not understand how Trump could rip off so many subcontractors they were all mob connected, let's be honest about it, and not get his legs broken. How did that happen?
Well, I wouldn't call them all mob connected. For instance, the guy who supplied his pianos for the Taj.
I know that, but there were enough.
There were a number of them who were mobbed up, no question.
Of them, right? Some of the bigger guys that I'm not. You're right. I shouldn't say. Yeah. But how did he get away with that?
Because
and not end up in the river.
Donald had all sorts of other. Donald is very, very good at figuring out who he needs to be friends with and who he needs to rat out in a way that they're totally in trouble. I mean, Donald is not without talent. He didn't get to the White House by being a complete idiot. He's the greatest con man in the history of the world. And by the way, since I brought up something and said the one exception of Donald Trump's business model, which was to borrow all the money and then $5 million if he could on top, some millions on top as a fee. So he had no money in the business. He never had one penny invested in Atlantic City. It was always a negative investment. The one exception was Trump University, where he put up $250,000 to start it. And that's the only business where he didn't borrow the money. Oh, all of them. He did business. There were two guys in the Philly mob who were known as the Young Executioners. And he did business deals with them and met with them. And the state police knew about these meetings. And when you're a casino owner, you're not supposed to be talking to mobsters.
How are you able to, throughout your entire career and every time I've ever interviewed you, recall shit like that in a moment? Like, what is your advice for people to keep their brain from? How do you? Are you? Like, have you always been like that, or is it Sudoku? What are you doing? Like, how did you just do that? How did you just say? It was actually the two Boston mobsters. Their name were Giovanni and Giuseppe, and they were both Scorpio. Like, how? What? How does your brain? How are you so smart?
Look,
whatever that is.
We're all born with different talents and abilities.
I was born with a perfect physique
and the ability to be funny, which is one of my children said to me, "Dad, you're not funny." It's just how the cards played out. That I have a very good
genetics
memory.
Is what he's trying to tell you.
I mean, there's not. Okay. I don't think there's any more to that.
There's no brain. There's no teaser.
But one of the things in life that's important to learn is that you have to deal with your circumstances, and if you don't, you're in terrible trouble. I was once dating an extraordinarily beautiful woman, and one day she said to me, and I have to clean up her language here, "Yeah, you think life is so wonderful because I'm so beautiful. You have no idea what men think when they look at me," and then a diatribe about that. And I said, "No, I sympathize with you about that, and, you should think about what if you had been born extraordinarily unattractive. And, so you have to live with your circumstances. And you want to be a baseball player and, you have a gimp leg, a damaged leg from your childbirth, then you're not going to be a baseball player.
What about
come to terms with it?
Why doesn't that person pull their bootstraps up?
You ever tried doing that, by the way?
Never knew what they were, but I've heard that I needed to more than enough times. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, David Cay Johnston. If anybody wants a picture with the legend, come get a picture now or something. Don't bother him. And then talk to him. Go eat. Will you please eat something? The sun's going to go out. And that is it. And there you have it, everybody. Well, what did you think? I really do want to get your feedback on this one. To those of you honeybees, that's what I'm now calling you, inspired by whoever gave me that advice. They need to take credit for it. I always call you bumblebees here at the end, but maybe I'm going to change it to honeybees and inspired by, and as a tribute to our good friend Kevin Richburg and all of his hardworking honeybees, none of which stung anyone that I know of at the entire weekend. So a lot of people were worried about that. Because there was like 2 million bees like right on top of us, but not a problem for anyone that I know of. So that was great night, a great weekend, and a great conversation. I hope you'll go let David Cay Johnston know that you heard this and or that you were there in person. Go hit him up on social media, Blue Sky, or anywhere else that he is on. And I look forward to the next opportunity I get to talk to him. Thanks so much for listening all the way to the end, and I can't do it without your support. So give a rating and review, and I'll post this up on YouTube as well. And that's it. That's all. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Back to the regular formatted show. David, thank you very much for joining me. And John Carroll also was amazing this weekend. I don't think I mentioned that at the top. So he sings us in, he sings us out. And on Friday night, he sang to us in person, and it was magical and wonderful and amazing. We were so lucky. And I'll try to play some of that video and audio on the show and at the Hangout as well. Take it away, Johnny.
Get up off of your butt, down off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience. Well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense, and you stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cause experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand